If we want to make a prediction about reagent versus imposter win rates, we're probably looking at something roughly along these lines, where imposters get the advantage over reagents at lower levels of play, but reagents overwhelmingly beat imposters at high levels of play. Because if you hear good players talk about the game mode, there is this clear consensus that even on the most imposter-sided trials, and no matter whether it's 1v1 or 2v2, 4v4 or anything, conservative estimate, reagents will be taking the win 90% of the time. And it won't even be close. Reagents have too many options, all of which are enormously rewarding. They can hide and run whenever they see an imposter. It's okay to neglect doing the objectives for as long as they want, because the imposters are the ones on a timer. With every encounter, the reagents can complete the trial during the downtimes. If that's too slow and too boring, the reagents can loot endless throwables and rig rechargers and have far greater and more reliable kill threat on the imposters than the imposters can have on the reagents. It's extraordinarily easy for only 2 coordinated reagents to gang up on and kill a single imposter, no matter how skilled that imposter is. Or, best of all, the reagents can just go pure speedrun mode, bang out all the objectives before the imposters have a chance to breathe, and the whole trial can be completed in 4 or 5 minutes tops. This means that the first strategy video I made on Invasion, advocating for slow and stealthy imposter gameplay, turned out to be completely wrong, because if you as an imposter spend all your time hiding in wait, the reagents will just leave you in the dust and beat the trial while you sit around achieving nothing. So out of everything I just mentioned, this reagent speedrun playstyle might be the most troublesome, because it forces the imposters to adhere to the reagent's pace and just play like brainless dogs chasing after a stick all trial long. They have no choice but to sprint straight at the reagents all the time. All strategy and forethought completely dies, because the only thing that ever matters is slowing down this Sonic the Hedgehog trial progress by any means necessary. Only if the reagents are willing to play disturbingly carelessly will the imposters manage to get a few slashes in, maybe an execute or two, but the Xpop are right, we reagents are like cockroaches. We don't stop reviving each other and chugging medicines. It doesn't matter how many slashes we take, we're tanky as Dr. Mundo, we're faster than Hecarim, and by the time the dust settles, all 4 reagents are running out of the shuttle together pretty much unscathed. Whatever damage the imposters landed on us throughout the trial ends up feeling largely inconsequential. Now, this sounds horrible, this makes Invasion sound unbearably unfun, but remember that everything I've just said is only relevant when you're zoomed in at the very top here. Only a very small proportion of players are good enough to speedrun trials to such a game-breaking degree. When you talk to less experienced players, and there's a lot of them nowadays, they must make up the majority of the player base ever since we've had this huge influx of new players in the last 2 months or so. These less experienced players will often report the opposite experience. They show up as the victims in these 2 scenarios on our little framework here, and they'll find that imposters are too overbearing. Reagents are under constant pressure by them for 3 straight minutes. You can't catch a break to hide or even touch the objectives at all. You always have to watch out for this super overpowered one shot. If you're a more experienced player hearing this, you might just say, no, that is a skill issue. All you need to do is get better at the game. You'll eventually see the true strength of reagents over imposters. And this is true. Reagents are undeniably favored in the current state of Invasion. There is zero argument to be made otherwise. But I think if we take such an uncompromising stance, and if Red Barrels does too, and they super buff imposters in service of only their more skilled players, then we're just going to drive away all these new players who haven't had much of a chance to learn and to adapt. We should not do this. On the flip side of that coin, if you are new to the Outlast trials and you're watching this video right now, I strongly recommend you to stay away from Invasion and just learn the base game properly first. Pure PvE, player versus environment, and nothing else. Because otherwise, if you hop into Invasion more or less blind, you're just going to get farmed and you're not going to have fun. I'm not trying to gatekeep, and I don't want to police how you choose to experience the game, but this is straight up not a game mode that you can enjoy if you don't have at least some idea of what you're doing, especially from the reagent side of things. In order to feel decently comfortable playing Invasion, I think you should first have every MK challenge played at least 3 times each, preferably every main trial as many times as well. From these experiences, you should be able to navigate all trial environments without ever getting lost or confused, no matter which doors or pathways are blocked. You should know how to complete all objectives entirely by your lonesome, if ever need be. These kinds of prerequisites probably translate to somewhere around 50 to 100 hours of playtime, depending on how fast of a learner you are. Either way, this is a fairly steep bar to clear, especially for those who only wanted to get the game to play PvP. And although these prerequisites are mostly important for reagent gameplay, imposters should also definitely have these skills and this knowledge so you can have properly informed expectations about where reagents want to go and what they want to do at any given point within any trial. In an ideal world, everyone will put in the work and get to this level of play, in which case the solution is easy. Everyone will realize reagents are OP, red barrels will then just buff imposters and they can call it a day. Although I think we will get to this state of affairs eventually is probably a long ways away, and what with the Outlast trials attracting a far more casual player base than most dedicated PvP games have, there is this big question of what red barrels should do in the meantime. It's incredibly difficult to balance a game like this for both audiences at the same time, your best players and your more casual players, because no matter what you do, you're leaving one party unhappy, even if you do your best to compromise. Newer players would be baffled at red barrels buffing imposters, the side which is already way stronger in their eyes, and experienced players will be unhappy if red barrels buffs reagents or leaves things as is. We're going to hear complaints such as, why should red barrels coddle and baby the new players and reward them for being bad at the game? Are we seriously making balance decisions catered towards those who are completely clueless? I actually think, yes, taking this course of action is not wrong. Right now, for the most skilled players, I think that despite all the pain points, imposters are almost in a bearable state, especially after the changes made on December 9th. Imposters received more speed and more stamina, reduced stamina drain on slashes, stuns don't last as long, and the whole grade system where we've reframed the goal from kill all reagents to hurt the reagents gives us much more realistic and achievable expectations as imposters. And as I've been saying, if you are a good player, the fact that there are so many new players beneath you with less experience than you means that you'll find a lot more success as imposter than you otherwise would. Obviously, it's not that satisfying to farm babies who don't even know how to crank a generator. Like, you want to sink your teeth into something juicy, I understand that urge. You want to be able to get into good stab on that relapse 30 reagent, but with the way the game is balanced right now, that reagent is always going to break your ankles and escape out the shuttle unharmed just about every time, as I mentioned at the start of this video. And you might also feel that even if red barrels designates your goal as only to hurt the reagents, where even if some or all of the reagents escape and complete the trial, if you get an A+, you can tell yourself you're winning, you might not be satisfied with that same belief. You might say, I want all the reagents dead anyways, I'm disappointed if I can't achieve this outcome. I understand that competitive drive as well. But take this line of thought. For experienced players, if you want to experience Invasion as being quote-unquote perfectly balanced, where I suppose imposters would kill all reagents in 50% of games, and at least one reagent would escape in the other 50%, we can see this right now. We won't experience it in the Invasion game mode itself, but in Genesis Psychosurgery trials, usually main trials, which get invaded outside the game mode. And I'm not telling you to play Genesis Psychosurgery in order to experience Invasion, and that's the only way you should do it. I'm saying that just looking at Psychosurgery can provide some useful insights into how the game can at some future point achieve a balanced state. In Genesis Psychosurgery, the three main differences from the Invasion game mode are that 1. Rig cooldowns are much higher, so reagents won't have stun and jammer ready for nearly every single encounter with imposters. 2. Item spawns are much less abundant, meaning reagent resources, in terms of medicines and throwables, can actually be meaningfully drained over time. If the imposters have frequent encounters with reagents where they force the usage of bricks and bottles, the reagents will find themselves looting the map dry appropriately quickly instead of it feeling the way it does in the Invasion game mode, where reagents just have endless throwables to use and it feels like they're not punished for being wasteful. 3. X-Pop actually do significant damage on Psychosurgery, making them an actual threat which reagents have to take proper precautions around. I don't know why the X-Pop in the Invasion game mode are so baby-like by comparison. They're hardly even a problem. You can sit there bathing in the Night Hunter's machete, and then, one small medicine later, you're smiling and loving life. And you can see how these three problems compound on one another. In the Invasion game mode, low X-Pop damage combined with the abundance of medicines means that health as a resource is hardly ever an issue, and then if the reagents are running heal rig, problem number 1 compounds even further here because of the low rig cooldowns I mentioned. On top of that, because X-Pop are not really a threat at all, you don't ever have to consider using your throwables on them, you're always only saving those for imposters. So Genesis Psychosurgery solves these problems, and using that as a kind of guideline, in my mind, Invasion is not hard to balance. We already have the answers in front of us, it's just a matter of at which point Red Barrels feels the player base will be comfortable moving forwards, and by how much. In fact, I think we have to be careful about what we wish for, because I wonder if perfect 50-50 balance is the same as ideal balance. I feel that to some small extent, reagents should be favored in Invasion, as they are today. We have to recognize the dynamic where everyone wants to play Impostor, and we see evidence of that in queue times, that Red Barrels has had to offer bonus XP as incentive for players to queue reagent and quick play. You can still nowadays get quick play games where you get 5 or more reagent matches in a row because the Impostor queue is just way too overstuffed and the system can't slot you in. And why does everyone want to play Impostor anyways? Because holding the knife is fun. Even when you're getting bullied by bricks and bottles, even when you have the stamina of a lifelong chain smoker, you're weak, you're disadvantaged, and you're still having fun. Not only that, you were having fun all trial long. Every moment spent inside the trial feels good because you're always on the hunt. Meanwhile, as reagent, whenever you're being chased by an impostor, it is stressful, it's challenging. You don't know if you're going to survive, and even if you do, there's this sense of relentlessness and exhaustion when you think about how the imposters are going to keep coming back again and again, so you can't dawdle at all, you can never relax, you always have to rush. Back to imposters now. How do imposters feel if they fail in their goal? Say you let the reagents escape at the end of the trial. Sure, there's definitely some disappointment there, but you can still easily smile about all the damage you did throughout the trial. If you stopped 2 out of 4 reagents from escaping alive, you might be happy about that. As a parallel, if you as reagents complete 50% of all objectives in the trial before you all die, you will not be happy about that, not at all. As a reagent, your fun is more or less contingent on this buildup of trial progress coming to fruition, as in you complete the trial. If you fail the trial, it's like a house of cards comes crumbling down, all your progress went to waste. It's a kind of we did all that just to lose mentality that imposters don't really suffer from by comparison. So if you're going into this supposedly perfectly balanced form of invasion, where you as reagents have a 50% chance of surviving the trial against imposter opponents of equal skill to you, I don't think you'll be very pleased with the game mode. And remember I said it would take the conditions of Genesis Psychosurgery for the game mode to be balanced in this way. Red Barrels once mentioned that surprisingly few members of the player base are skilled enough to handle Psychosurgery in the base game. Add in the very extreme threat that imposters pose, and very few players are going to be brave enough to queue as reagent at that point, further exacerbating our queue times problem. So the balance team has to be extraordinarily careful. It's no secret reagents are overpowered, but they probably should be, at least by a decent margin, and it's all a matter of deciding just how big or how small that decent margin should be. I guess Red Barrels can only experiment and find out. And we should also remember that Red Barrels has access to a lot of really important data that influences their balancing decisions that we do not know about. Throughout this video I've talked about how I imagine reagents are favored, but it could be the case that the abundance of new players is so abundant that they're sinking reagent win rates to the bottom of the ocean, in which case we would easily understand why Red Barrels could not, in good conscience, offer any more buffs to imposters than they already have. The truth is, we do not know what the global win rates of imposters versus reagents are. We don't know how those win rates change or scale with hours played in the Outlast trials in total, and with hours played in the Invasion game mode specifically. We don't know which trials the data says are impostor-sided versus reagent-sided. We don't know the average amount or rate of slashes and stabs an impostor is successfully landing per trial. We don't know the average amount of incapacitations of reagents per trial. We have our intuitions about these sorts of things, of course, but intuitions can be wildly, horribly wrong. I could be arguing from the totally wrong side of things throughout this entire video. I kind of hope that Red Barrels makes some sort of blog post one day where they show the data, which explains some of their balancing decisions. A lot of other dev teams do this. Red Barrels might have their own reasons for not following suit, I'm not sure. That said, I'm still going to be suggesting balance changes later on in this video, because even though I could be wrong in my assessments on the state of the game mode, I don't think I am. But because the possibility exists, I think this is also why, if we can make the game mode more fun for both sides in ways that do not require direct balance changes, that would be for the best. And I think the best place to start is with the grade system for imposters specifically. One of the big reasons playing Impostor still feels bearable at all is because you are allowed to let the reagents escape, but you can still get an A+, and that's a very nice consolation prize. It almost feels like an understatement to call it a consolation prize. It genuinely feels pretty good. At least until you reach Gold 1, at which point you might not care about your grade any longer, and you only care about killing as many reagents as you can, in which case, sorry, there is no more consolation. That aside, as well intentioned as the grade system is, I've noted a lot of issues with factors determining whether your grade goes up or down. The basic statute of being punished for mistakes and rewarded for positive actions is a little bit out of whack. Let's ask ourselves, is it a mistake on the part of an imposter to get hit with projectiles? Intuitively, we want to believe it is a mistake, right? Imposters should be trying to avoid bricks and bottles and stun rigs, and it must be a failing on their part if they don't. But the reality is, Getting hit with projectiles is nothing more than a natural consequence to approaching reagents. Imposters must approach reagents if they want to succeed at invasion, there is no other way around it. You can spend all day jumping back and forth and wiggling behind walls to bait out or dodge reagent projectiles, but then you're just stalemating yourself or burning your stamina, and as I described earlier, you can't really be doing this all the time because you need to be constantly pressuring reagents because you, the imposter, are the ones on a timer. More pressingly, there's a lot of situations where projectiles are not dodgeable, especially stun rigs thrown at the ground around your feet, and it would be much more accurately characterized as severe incompetence on the part of the reagent to miss the projectile than it would be skillful for them to hit it. And so when you inevitably do get hit by a projectile as imposter, there are so many negative consequences hailing down on you at once. First, you're stunned briefly in place. Second, the projectile drains some of your stamina. Third, you've lost health, making you easier to kill and less incentivized to continue your hunt because of the risk of death. That health loss also counts as a fourth negative consequence because every lost bracket of health translates to an increased 15-second delay for the next imposter spawn. Fifth, you lose grade points. Because getting projectile spammed is already so heavily punishing, I think imposters should lose significantly fewer grade points for getting hit with projectiles. Maybe they shouldn't lose any points at all. But does that sound too overboard and too forgiving towards imposters? Let me pair this with another suggestion. I think imposters should not get any positive grade points for entering the insertion gates. I think this is such a weird mechanic, by the way. Why are we rewarding imposters for performing an action that requires zero skill that can be performed at any time, even if it's to the detriment of the imposter team? We're seeing this strategy of imposters doing nothing in invasion except for exiting and re-entering the insertion gates over and over and over. They don't try to hunt or kill the reagents, they don't try to engage with them at all, because many players have figured out that approaching skilled reagents is much likelier to harm your grade than it is to help it. It goes without saying the game mode should not function in this way at all. Imposters should be rewarded for engaging with the reagents as often as they can, even if that means taking bricks to the face. I think it's only deaths that should punish an imposter's grade, because death can in many cases be avoided so long as you aren't too greedy. By contrast, engagement is a good thing to reward because it takes skill for an imposter to track a reagent and stay on their tail for extended periods of time, and imposters should be rewarded for putting this kind of pressure on reagents. So in order to encourage engagement as much as possible, I wonder if Red Barrels can implement a system where an imposter's grade starts slowly, very slowly, very slowly, going up whenever they gain line of sight on a reagent, and their grade continues to gradually go up with continued and increased proximity of the imposter to the reagent. You would still gain big boosts to your grade for getting off slashes and stabs and executes, of course, but the proximity system would introduce a slow but consistent means of getting your grade up over time. Have you ever played Need for Speed Carbon? There would be these canyon races in that game which would function in a really similar way to what I'm suggesting. In that game, there would be these 1v1 races, and one car would be given a head start. The car behind would gain points at a faster rate if they stuck as close as possible to the tail of the car ahead. That's basically what I'm suggesting for invasion. There would probably have to be some rescaling done, of course, so that it requires many more positive actions to increase your grade than it does on live patch, because otherwise it'd probably be too easy to get an A+ just by being a good chaser alone. But this proximity system I'm recommending might also be really good for fulfilling the initial vision of the invasion game mode. It looks like invasion was intended to be this trickster-styled who's who kind of affair, where imposters made genuine attempts to blend in with the reagents and gain their trust, hence the tagline for reagent gameplay, "Don't trust anyone." Sounds cool on paper, but in practice, none of this factors in at all. There's no question of trust. It's almost always immediately obvious who the imposters are, even in 4v4, because most imposter players never make any attempt to blend in, because there's no great or reliable reward for doing so. However, if we had this proximity-based grade system, you would be more incentivized to convince reagents into thinking you're one of them, because if you successfully did, you would watch your grade climb steadily as you walked side by side with the reagents. But I'm thinking maybe there should be a limit to how much your grade can increase in a single instance of trickery, because even though faking your identity is very hard to pull off, especially against smart players who have voice comms, it would be kind of silly if you went straight from D to A+ just by hugging a really naive reagent for 2 minutes straight. Maybe you can only go up a grade and a half during one instance of reagent proximity, or something like that, because the whole point is that we want to translate the establishment of that trust into a kill, right? So in order to further encourage this fantasy of faking your identity, I have more suggestions to move on to now, because those are most of the grade related suggestions I had to offer. First, I think that as an imposter, the face of the reagent you are impersonating should appear as a small icon on your screen at all times, because that single 5-second pop-up of "you are impersonating Frank Ocean" gets very easily forgotten, which only further discourages you from trying to blend in. If you cannot remember whether you're running into the player who you look like or not, you're even less certain over whether your disguise will work, so you don't want to try. With a permanent icon of the impersonated face on the UI, it doesn't have to take up much space at all. This won't be a problem any longer. Currently, imposters can offer fake items to reagents. Reagents cannot accept this fake item. I feel like reagents should be able to accept, and if they do, it instantly sucks them into the imposter's stab animation. Isn't this the most obvious and coolest extension of this mechanic? This isn't my idea, by the way. I saw a few different people suggest this. I don't know who came up with it first or originally, or maybe different people came up with the same idea on their own, but I think it's super cool and it just makes too much sense to not be in the game. My only concern is that it might cause some internal debate over whether or not the fake item mechanic should still be a prescription or not, because this accept into stab opens up a not insignificant amount of kill power to imposters over those who don't have this prescription. But prescriptions are so easy to acquire, it's not as if it's a huge time gate or anything, it's probably fine. One more grade related suggestion I have to make is actually bluriate-ma. He pointed out that once imposters perform enough positive actions to achieve an A+, there's no incentive to do anything more in the trial, because no matter how many extra slashes and stabs you get on top of your A+, if a single projectile hits you, you're dropping back down to an A, then an A-, then you have to go back to fighting for your A+ again. I think that the very simple solution to this is to make it so that when you already have an A+, whatever positive actions you perform on top of that will add a kind of protective layer of fat into your grade. So for instance, say you get your A+, then after that you get 10 extra slashes in. That will act as your protection, so you can tank roughly 10 more projectiles before you see your A+ drop down to an A again. I think a system like this only makes sense because as it stands now, imposters are encouraged to hide away and do nothing once they get their A+. There is one change Red Barrel's made in the last patch I want to lend a lot of recognition to it. It's the change that reagents in Invasion must complete a mandatory secondary objective. This does a lot of work to prevent the most speedrunnable of trials from being so speedrunnable. It increases the duration of the trial without feeling like artificial filler, and increased trial duration is a huge boon in whatever way we can achieve it, because one of the main pain points for imposters is that oftentimes it doesn't feel like you're getting enough juice for your squeeze. Trials end long before any of the fun can really begin. This is mostly a problem when you're playing in groups of 3 or 4 and you're the last member of your imposter team to go in. You could be waiting like up to 4 or 5 minutes for your turn to enter the trial. Like I said earlier, against skilled reagents, they could be beating the trial in 4 or 5 minutes. So you as an imposter might only get to show up once during the exit rush sequence where all imposters are unleashed, but if the reagents are well coordinated, they are beating you to the shuttle first and they're ready to bully you there with projectiles, ensuring there is no chance for you to improve your grade at all, let alone have any fun. So maybe you start thinking to yourself, damn, I wish I got the chance to enter the trial first. If you're the first imposter to enter a trial against good reagents, you are getting disgustingly bullied by their fresh rig cooldowns. It's hard to get a win around here. So it's evident that the mandatory secondary objective change, it helped, it was a step in the right direction, but it still might not be enough. At times, I like main trials a little more than MK challenges for Invasion because the length of the trial ensures you are getting a lot of juice for your squeeze. The thing is, of course, you don't always want to be playing such long and exhausting trials, hence the existence of MK challenges in the first place. That's why the game mode of Invasion is based out of them. So this is a very delicate problem to solve. I'm going to tackle it more directly at the end of the video, but for now, let's look at what we can more easily change. If the reality is that you're going to be spending such a large proportion of your time as an imposter watching the cameras, maybe the camera system can be made more engaging. I think pinging reagents on cameras should also provide a small boost to grade. This boost has to be on a pretty hefty cooldown though, because you'll get a lot of situations where a reagent has to stand around for 30 seconds in a visible area, unavoidably so, and in such circumstances, ping the reagent 20 times should not give 20 boost to your grade. Maybe it should be something like, if an individual reagent has not been pinged in the past 45 seconds or so, or maybe a minute, pinging them provides 1 out of 3 progress towards a grade boost. So if you ping 3 different reagents, you get 1 grade boost. There would obviously have to be some scaling done for solo versus duo versus groups, and I don't know if ping cooldowns should be shared between imposters, probably not, but I'm just trying to introduce the concept rather than figure out how to make it perfectly balanced here and now. Outside of grade, a lot of people have been asking for more direct impact from cameras. I think it might also be cool if there was a mechanic where pinging reagents alerted X-pop to the reagent location. This would also have to be on a cooldown, probably a full minute or more per individual reagent. So the way I'm thinking this would work is when you ping a reagent, the XPOP don't start moving right away, but you get a prompt which appears for as long as the ping lasts, asking if you want to alert the XPOP to the reagents now. This gives you a good amount of strategic choice in the matter, because sometimes you just want to ping reagents for the tracking power to show your teammates where they are, where they're going, and what they're doing, and sometimes there's no XPOP around to be alerted, so you would not want to waste that cooldown. There would be many different ways to balance this too, depending on whether or not it turned out to be overpowered or underpowered on release. If it's OP, maybe reagents would be notified when the imposter ping was alerting XPOP to the location. It could be as simple as playing the Gryffindor common room sound effect. If it's underpowered, maybe increase the speed at which XPOP run to the reagent's location, and maybe the XPOP don't just run to where the reagent was initially pinged, because reagents are always on the move and XPOP might just be biting dust if they do that. Maybe the XPOP track and follow the ping as the reagent is on the move. Introducing this mechanic, it would also more strongly incentivize reagents to at least consider destroying cameras with projectiles. Currently, at the highest level of play, there are very few cameras which are ever worth destroying. Reagents have learned to stockpile projectiles solely for direct use against imposters, because having that kill threat is just way too valuable. But by increasing the threat that cameras pose, you force this choice on reagents whether to save projectiles for cameras or for imposters, and this encourages more intelligent play where decisions are not so trivialized. Now I want to introduce my more direct balancing suggestions. I'm just putting them on a big list here because a lot of them are kind of self-explanatory. You'll see I've separated the changes by time frame, because I think if you suddenly added all these changes in one big patch, it would make imposters too strong too quickly. Maybe after the addition of the immediate and short-term changes, we would find imposters feel strong enough, and then there would be no need for the long-term or the experimental changes. So starting with the immediate changes, everybody knows stun rig is just too strong and way too reliable for how little skill it takes to use. You don't have to aim it at the imposter themselves, you aim it at the ground at their feet. It's basically impossible to miss, and so I want to encourage reagents to be more skillful in their usage of it. Find good timings to throw it directly at the imposter when you know it's difficult for them to dodge. As for damage to imposters upon interrupting their execute, I feel like this has always been really strange. I get that there's a risk versus reward element that Red Barrels is trying to introduce, but the risk to imposters performing executes is already very high, because the execution animations take a very long time, and once imposters get the incapacitation off, they only have 30 seconds to return to the insertion gate anyways. So even without a full bar of damage on interrupt, or 2 full bars of damage when a projectile is used, I think imposters are taking more than enough risk when going for executes. The way it is now, imposters often have no choice but to give up on the executions and just evacuate the trial, meaning incapacitated reagents are easily picked up by their teammates after waiting just 30 seconds, and as I explained earlier, a couple easily looted medicines earlier, and it's like all the imposters' hard work to pull off that incapacitation in the first place is completely erased in less than a minute, and they get to watch all this from the cameras and frown. Now, before I talk about the short-term, long-term changes, one big thing I want to address is the ease and reliability with which teams of reagents can kill imposters. The infamous stun-jammer duo. The combo of brick into stun into jammer into brick, and that's it, the imposter dies. It almost trivializes the threat that imposters pose. Even if reagents mess up and only take 3 out of 4 bars of the imposter's health, that still basically forces the imposter to retreat and puts the next imposter on a 1 minute 15 second cooldown. That is devastating. There's a reason that, by parallel, jump slash tech was removed from imposters, because the capacity to 100 to 0 a reagent from the slightest mistake on their part was deemed much too powerful. Even a solo reagent can pull off minesweep into brick into stun, that's also 3 bars of health. I met a fellow just the other day by the name of Organic Chemistry who got this technique down to a science. No, I can't believe... Oh, hello. Is there a damage reduction? Wait, can I get some damage reduction in this game? That's okay. He manages to get a full 2 bars of damage in from 2 bricks while the imposter is staggered by the minesweep. The stun rig on top secures the full 100 to 0. At least this solo minesweep tech takes a lot more skill and preparation than stun jammer duo, but still, it makes me wonder if it should be in the game. You know, when you compare the techniques, it's hard to say stun jammer duo requires any respectable level of preparation, because if you're a decent player, you never need to save your rigs for anything except imposters. Well, I don't know, I try to play devil's advocate with myself. Maybe when playing against groups of 3 or 4 reagents, imposters have to learn to stick together so they can cover each other from any potential reagent bullying. It's worth noting that a coordinated duo of imposters can also pull off similarly devastating combos which threaten the 100 zeroing of a reagent. Two imposters catch a lone reagent. If you stagger your slash cooldowns with one another, you can pseudo stunlock the reagent and kill them in 3 consecutive slashes. But I feel like I want to say that this takes much more skill than reagent kill combos do, and we must also remember that when imposters stick together to hunt a single reagent, they're really putting all their eggs in one basket. They absolutely have to successfully kill their target because the other 2 or 3 reagents are free to do whatever they want and make all the trial progress they please completely unbothered. So I like stagger slashes being in the game. I like that imposters have this much threat because they're putting a lot at stake in order to do so. I guess I don't like stun jammer combos because it takes much less skill, and it's much less risky, it's much too punishing for the opponents, and I said the same for jump slash tech when it existed in the game. That said, I do think imposter players in a 4v4 need to get in the habit of hunting as a duo, not so that they can perform the stagger slash tech, but because if you hunt alone, you have to expect you can and will be bullied by the reagents. Maybe once imposters get really good at coordinating their attacks and this becomes the standard style of play, we won't feel there's so much need for nerfing reagent bully combos anymore, at least in terms of 4v4. But because bully combos are just super OP in a lot of circumstances, in order to nerf them, the solution is also pretty simple. Currently, imposters are protected with damage reduction from chained projectiles, and this does not apply to rigs. Apply the damage reduction to rigs, maybe even to environmental traps, but using environmental traps against imposters takes much more skill than projectiles or rigs, so I can't say I support that change with much confidence. But overall, preventing imposters from being so easily killable, I think this is a good direction to take the game mode for now, since I imagine the killing of imposters isn't even a skill that's within the toolkit of our less experienced player base, so this shouldn't harm their experience so drastically, but it will make the game more enjoyable for more skilled players. As for the short-term and long-term changes, I feel I've already justified these in my earlier comparison of the Invasion game mode to Genesis Psychosurgery, but as I also talked about, I'm afraid that dipping our toes in this territory risks making the game mode very unfun for that less skilled cohort of players. I said that we have to wait for the player base to improve at the game, which will happen, but we don't know by how much or how quickly. One thing we can be certain of is that if we added all these changes right now, we could make the very skilled players very happy, but that is not the only factor. The main thing I haven't talked about in this video so far is the different experiences you'll have in 1v1 compared to 2v2, compared to 1v2 and 4v4 and so on and so on. Solo imposter versus duo reagent is notoriously rough, whereas I think duo imposter versus trio reagent gives imposter some of the best chances. Some more sensitivity in the balancing for these different matchups could be done here, but I'm tired and I don't want to make any more suggestions. Okay, that's the end of my roleplay of Red Barrel's lead balance designer. I've tried to see things from all perspectives. Maybe you think I've been too lenient and too accommodating towards the new players. Maybe you think I'm advocating too heavily for imposter buffs. Either way, I still personally really like Invasion as it is. I think I'm in that sweet spot where I have enough experience in the game mode to get good results and have fun when I do play, but I also don't play so often that the issues of the game mode, they don't grate on me and wear on me so much. Maybe if I played more, I'd be able to speak with more experience about the game mode. I don't want you to feel like you've been listening to low opinions the whole time. I'd like to think that watching a lot of good players play Invasion and having them as my teammates has given me knowledge by proxy about the most expert level of play. Well,